the sky over the ruined world of Graia Minor had long since forgotten the colour of blue. Its heavens were a cancerous veil of ash and poison clouds, torn eternally by distant artillery fire and the slow, burning collapse of a dying star. The air reeked of sacred oils burned in desperation, of flesh turned to cinders by lass fire, of incense poured into shrine fires that had not gone out in centuries. War was not an event here. It was the atmosphere itself. The thunder came without warning. It was not the shriek of macro cannons, not the grind of war engines, not the psychic howl of the warp tearing across reality. It was something older, cleaner. It split the ruined sky, as if a forgotten god had struck the world with a blade of living sound. Imperial guardsmen, already half mad from sleepless rotations and the constant whisper of radiation in their bones, fell to their knees as the sound washed over them. Auspex arrays shattered. Vox relays screamed and died. In the upper ruins of what had once been a manufactorum cathedral, the stained, blackened windows exploded outward as a column of lightning descended from the heavens. At its center, a figure fell. The impact was silent for a single impossible second. Then the earth detonated. Stonecrete fractured like bone. Rusted machinery was hurled aside as if struck by a titan's fist. Bolted down shrines were overturned, their votive bones scattering into the dust. When the dust settled, he lay in the crater. Golden hair matted with blood. A red cloak torn and scorched. Armor unlike any pattern ever recorded in the data vaults of Mars, marked with symbols no mechanicus sigil could decipher. His body was carved by old scars, the proud testimony of wars older than this broken Imperium. Thor, son of Odin, lay unconscious upon a world that had never known Asgard, nor mercy. Thunder rolled again, but now it came from him. The air around his body shimmered faintly, charged with static. The broken earth trembled not from bombardment, but from his slow, unsteady breath, as life returned to his lungs. Somewhere in the ruins, servo skulls drifted, their optics whirring as they recorded the anomaly, their binharic prayers rasping through ruined speakers. Within seconds, red sigils flared to life across distant Auspex towers. Unknown energy signature, non-warp-based atmospheric breach, biological entity detected, threat level, indeterminate, high. Imperial response was inevitable. By the time Thor's eyes opened, iron-soled boots surrounded the crater's edge. They were not soldiers, not merely men. They were giants in blackened armor inscribed with litanies of hatred and devotion. Space Marines, their presence radiating the cold inevitability of extinction. Bolters aimed down at him, their throats of mass reactive death locked and waiting. Thor pushed himself to one knee, the stone cracking beneath his hand. His vision swam. He smelled blood and ozone, but not the familiar salt of sea spray or the green life of forgotten forests. Instead, burning oil, rot, industrial decay, and something far worse beneath it all. Fear, not his, theirs. One of the giants spoke, his voice a growl filtered through Vox grills. Do not rise, warp spawn. You stand upon an imperial world. Thor looked at them, and in their glassy, inhuman lenses, he saw not warriors, but prisoners of something vast and crushing. I am no demon, he said, though the word tasted strange in his mouth. His voice carried the rumble of distant storms, unbroken despite the weight of the world pressing down upon him. Nor do I know this realm. A second Marine stepped forward, his armor marked with the sigil of the Inquisition. Red wax seals fluttered like dying birds from his shoulders. In his gauntlet, a device hummed, black stone circuits designed to detect sorcery, witchcraft, and the hunger of the warp. The device remained silent. No warp corruption, no psychic signature, no daemonic taint. The silence was more damning than any alarm. The Marine lowered the bolt gun slightly, but only slightly. Impossible, he muttered. Energy readings without warp resonance. Thor rose fully now, towering even among them. The air crackled faintly around him as thunder murmured just beyond mortal hearing. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the horizon of firestorms, the skeletal remains of hive structures, the endless war machines crawling like insects across the land. "This world is wounded," he said. The lead Marine spoke again, more cautious now. "Identify yourself, anomaly. Your existence is heretical." For the first time, Thor hesitated. He searched his own memory, and what he found there was smoke, collapsed skies, and a bridge of light that had not been the Bifrost. He remembered defending Midgard, remembered a sky splitting apart in colours not meant for mortal eyes, remembered reaching for a storm that felt wrong. "I am Thor," he said finally, "son of Odin, protector of realms." The words echoed across the ruins. The Marines exchanged silent data bursts over closed vox. The inquisitorial sigils flared on their armour. A god, or a lie shaped like one. High above, beyond poison clouds and ruined stars, vast black vessels shifted their course. Thrusters ignited. Trajectories changed. A black ship had marked his location. Chains were already being prepared. And deep within the warp, something ancient stirred, sensing a thunder that did not belong, and hungered to see it broken. As the first null field shackles were activated in the hands of his would-be captors, Thor felt it, a crushing pressure pressing inward, not from the sky, but from the very soul of this universe. And for the first time in his long, immortal life, the god of thunder felt the presence of something that did not fear him, something that watched and judged. Was this realm a battlefield or a grave? The null field shackles bit into the air before they ever touched him. Thor felt them as a sudden absence in the world, a wound in reality where storm and life and song simply ceased to exist. When the black metal bands snapped closed around his wrists, there was no flash of pain, only silence, a suffocating, unnatural quiet that swallowed the thunder from his veins. The Space Marines moved with silent, ritualized precision, their gauntlets locked into the chains, their armor sealing with hydraulic hisses as they pulled him from the crater like a relic dredged from an ocean grave. He did not resist, not because he could not, but because the universe itself seemed to be watching, waiting to see what kind of god would struggle against chains forged for demons. Above them, the sky split, not with lightning, not with Asgardian fire, but with the arrival of a ship that did not so much descend as loom into reality. The black ship cut its way through poison clouds like a blade through rotting flesh. Its hull was layered with cathedrals of iron and bone, statues of screaming saints bolted to its armoured flanks. Thrusters burned with corpse light, their exhaust staining the sky in slow, bloody spirals. The Inquisition had come. Thor was marched through the broken streets of Graia Minor, past lines of kneeling guardsmen who dared not look upon him. They pressed their foreheads to the ash-choked ground, whispering frantic prayers as he passed. "Emperor, preserve us. A false idol walks. Saint or sin. Saint or sin." The words followed him like flies around a corpse. At the foot of a shattered tower of steel and prayer, the black ship's maw opened. Its boarding ramp descended like the tongue of a great metallic beast. Cold, dead air spilled out, carrying with it the smell of antiseptic chemicals and older things, fear, madness, and the faint copper tang of dried blood soaked into the very walls. He felt it before he crossed the threshold. A presence. Not the Emperor, not yet, but something adjacent to him. A machine-bound will that catalogued, recorded, judged. The ship was alive in the way a tomb can be alive, saturated with memory, screaming silently with every soul it had ever carried. Inside, the walls narrowed. Candles burned in recessed iron skulls, their wax dripping like slow tears. Servo skulls lined the ceilings, their red optics never blinking as they tracked his movements. The chains pulled tighter. A voice echoed through hidden vox grills, stripped of warmth or hesitation. Subject: non-warp anomalous entity. Designation pending. Transport to Terra authorized. Thor's gaze fell on the floor. Engraved in the metal were prayers carved by hands long since flayed or burned. Promises of obedience, of surrender, of faith in a God who did not answer. "Where do you take me?" he asked. No one answered. The doors sealed shut with a sound like a coffin being nailed. The voyage was not measured in time, but in silence. He was placed within a chamber lined with black stone pylons. Their surfaces drank, in energy, emotion, and divinity alike. They did not hurt him. They erased him. His strength felt distant, as though his own storm had been pushed behind a wall of lead and buried memory. Yet his mind remained sharp. He felt the engines engage, a bone-deep vibration that crawled through the marrow, tearing at reality as the ship entered the warp. Unlike the storms he knew, this was not a realm of raw power. It was a screaming abyss of sentient hatred. Even with the Geller fields flaring to life around the hull, he felt the eyes of things clawing at the edge of existence. Whispers, not in words, but in images of rot and madness. Visions of golden thrones powered by endless suffering, of cities built from bones, of angels with broken wings bathing in blood. Thor clenched his fists. The chains absorbed the lightning that tried to rise inside him. The Blackstone drank the thunder before it could breathe. In distant compartments of the ship, other prisoners screamed, psychers, heretics, witches, humanity broken and bound. None of them were like him. That frightened the ship's masters more than any demon ever could. An inquisitor entered the chamber. He wore white armor etched with punishment litanies. His face was gaunt, pale, carved by years of sanctioned horror. A rosarius glowed faintly at his throat, a relic humming with barely restrained psychic wards. "You are not warp-born," the Inquisitor said, studying him like a scholar examining a blasphemous text. "You are not touched by chaos." Thor met his gaze, calm, unbowed. "I have fought many monsters," he said. "None wore your chains." The Inquisitor said nothing for a long moment, then softly, "That is precisely why you are dangerous." He turned and left, sealing the chamber once more. The ship screamed as it tore through impossible distances, riding the knife edge between reality and oblivion. Far away, Terra waited, not as a home, but as a test. As the silence pressed in and the warp howled just beyond the walls of unbreakable metal, Thor felt it again. That pressure, that watching presence. Stronger now, not a god, not a demon, but something ancient, bound, and immobile, yet impossibly vast. And in the dark, as the black ship hurtled toward the heart of a dying empire, a single, terrible thought took root within him. If this emperor was real, why did his realm feel so much like a prison? And when he stood before that golden throne, would he be judged or claimed? The black ship did not dock with Terra so much as kneel before it. From the void, the throne world appeared not as a planet, but as a wound in reality that had been wrapped in gold and turned into a monument. Vast orbital cathedrals drifted like chained continents around it. Defense platforms the size of cities tracked the ship's approach with godlike patience. Every surface burned with devotional fire, every shadow heavy with unspoken threat. Thor felt the change in the air long before the ship's hull began to cool. Terror was not like other worlds. It pressed inward. The ramp descended into a corridor carved from black stone older than empires. Hooded figures waited, their faces hidden behind death masks of polished bone. No words were spoken. None were needed. They fastened heavier chains to his wrists, links engraved with wards and scripture flakes of gold that flaked beneath his touch like dried blood. He was marched through halls that were once palaces and were now tombs made sacred by endless use. The smell was overwhelming. Burning incense thick as fog, old parchment. Blood scrubbed again and again from stone that could never forget. Behind walls too thick to break, billions prayed. They did not pray with hope, they prayed with terror. At the end of the passage, the doors waited. They were not opened by hands, they were opened by will. Machines groaned in unheard frequencies. Ancient pistons moved with ritual slowness. The doors parted like the ribs of a colossal beast being forced apart. The chamber beyond was not merely a room. It was a graveyard of gods. The golden throne sat at the far end like a mountain made of gold, bone, wires, and suffering. Miles of cables ran from it in every direction, disappearing into the walls, the floor, the air. Psychers, thousands of them, were sealed into sockets like candles being slowly burned alive to keep a single broken flame alive. And upon the throne was not a god as Thor understood. It was a man, a skeleton wrapped in light, a corpse drowning in power. The air screamed without sound. Thor felt it immediately, a pressure that had no source, no wind, no direction. It was the weight of a will that had once reshaped stars and now was trapped inside broken flesh and endless torment. The chains shook, not from him, from the throne. The robed figures forced him to his knees, though his muscles did not obey them. The kneeling was symbolic, ritualistic. Even bound, even silent, he would not bow unless he chose to. The light from the throne intensified. The Emperor looked at him. There were no eyes to see with, no mouth to speak, yet the gaze was unmistakable. Thor felt his mind touched, not violently, not invasively, but with an old, exhausted curiosity, not a godhood recognizing another, but a ruler studying a strange storm. Images flooded Thor's thoughts. A galaxy on fire. A son named Horus crowned in betrayal. Cities burned in the name of unity. Dreams of reason strangled by necessity. He saw the Emperor walking among mortals in ancient ages, silent, brilliant, ruthless. He saw the golden age of technology collapse into teeth and madness. He saw the birth of an Imperium built not on hope, but on fear strong enough to endure. And beneath it all, pain. Endless pain, not physical, existential. A god trapped in a machine, holding back oblivion by will alone. Thor felt his own heart falter, not from fear, from understanding. So, his thoughts went, unbidden, unstoppable. This is your war. The throne's light flared. The golden cables writhed. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the corpse on the throne was not a corpse. It was a king, not speaking, judging. And something else happened. The machinery around the throne reacted to him. Warning runes flared crimson. Psychers chained to the machine spasmed in their cages. Several died instantly, their souls burned out by a pressure they had never felt before. He disrupts the pattern. One tech priest whispered in terror. Non-warp, non-psyker, but resonance. Thor felt the room closing in. He reached for the storm within him without thinking. It answered. A faint crackle of lightning danced across his skin, not drawn from heaven, not ripped from the warp, but born of him, old and stubborn and not yet broken. The golden throne responded. A sudden pulse of light surged outward, not as an attack, but as a warning. Do not bring your storm here. For one impossible moment, Titan-born god and Terran-bound emperor regarded one another in perfect, terrible silence. Two relics from universes that should never have touched. Two forces that did not understand one another, yet saw too much. The robed figures began to chant frantically, their voices trembling. Seal the chamber. Withdraw the anomaly. The throne is disturbed. Chains hauled backward. The doors began to close. But Thor did not look away until the last sliver of light vanished. In that final instant, he felt something brush against his mind. Not a word, not a command, a question, not spoken, but undeniable. Are you salvation, or just another storm? The doors slammed shut. The silence rushed back in. And as they dragged him away, Thor realized that for the first time since his arrival, something in this universe had not tried to break him. It had tried to measure him, and he did not know if he had passed or failed. The corridors of terror felt narrower after the throne. Thor was led not to a cell, not to a dungeon, but to a sanctum of iron and incense, where judgment was performed not by silence, but by debate. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with statues of saints, whose eyes wept gold and whose mouths were open in silent screams of devotion. Chains were removed from his wrists, not as mercy, but as necessity. The Inquisition did not fear what was bound. They feared what could not be understood. High-ranking figures ringed the chamber, their robes heavy with seals and sacred script. Cardinals of the ecclesiarchy burned slow-burning censers that filled the air with choking clouds of myrrh and sanctified oils. Tech priests hovered near the walls, their metal limbs twitching with Binhuric whispers. He disturbs the throne, one whispered. He did not scream, another countered, nor did he burn. A demon would have howled, a third murmured. Thor stood silent in the center of them all, feeling the eyes of an empire crawl across his skin. He could feel the weight of their fear, of their doctrine, of their desperate need for certainty in a universe that had rotted beyond reason. Finally, a figure stepped forward. His armor was gilded and engraved with wings and chains. The symbol of the Aquila, the two-headed eagle of the Imperium, stretched across his chest. His voice boomed through the chamber. If he is a lie, the man said, he will be broken in war. If he is truth, he will be proven only through blood. The floor split open before Thor with the grinding of sacred gears. From below, carried upward by mechanical arms carved like rib cages, came a weapon. A hammer, not Mjolnir. Something fashioned by mortal hands that worshipped violence as sacrament. Its head was forged from star metal and blackstone alloy, inlaid with scripture so small it could only be read by machines. Power conduits ran along its haft, glowing faintly with caged lightning drawn from storm reactors far above Terra's poisoned clouds. A warhammer of the Imperium. He will not wield his own weapon, the golden-armored figure continued. He will wield ours. He will bear our symbol. A servo arm pressed a plate of adamantium toward Thor's chest. Upon it, burning with faint internal light, was the Aquila, the Emperor's mark, a brand hot enough to scar flesh, cold enough to break a soul. Thor did not flinch as it was pressed to him. The metal kissed his skin. The Aquila burned itself into his armor, the light flaring as if in protest of being forced upon something it did not recognize. "So," the man said, "go. Fight where we command. If you are a saint, you will live. If you are a blasphemy, you will die." The hammer floated toward him. Thor reached out. The weapon trembled. For a heartbeat, the machine spirits inside it resisted, violent and furious, unused to hands that did not pray to gears and data. Then his fingers closed around its haft. The hum changed. The conduits flickered. Somewhere deep in its iron heart, the hammer's spirit did not submit. It listened. Hours later, he stood amid the drop bay of a strike cruiser. Rows of space marines locked themselves into launch cradles, their armor ringing with the sound of sacred locking mechanisms. Bolters were blessed by robed serfs with sacred oils and whispered litanies. Chainswords were anointed as though they were holy texts. The target was displayed as burning runes in the air, Calth's ashes. Once a world of order, now a world of rebellion and rot. "Chaos uprising," a marine said to him, not unkindly, but not respectfully. "Prove your worth, anomaly." The cruiser shook as it entered the upper atmosphere. The air tasted of static and burning fuel. The roar of descent was not thunder, but it spoke to something in Thor that had not yet died. Drop pods were launched like iron meteors. He was given no pod. He was given no restraints. He simply stepped into the open bay. The wind tried to tear him backward. The world below burned. He leapt. The fall was a blur of ash storms and tracer fire. Bolter rounds streaked past him, not aimed at him, but at the writhing shapes clawing their way through the ruins below. Demonic silhouettes twisted in firelight, their forms half real, half hate. Thor struck the ground like a comet, stone shattered. The war hammer met the earth a heartbeat later. The machine spirit inside it screamed as it tasted blood for the first time. The battle was immediate. Cultists in rusted armor charged, screaming prayers to dead gods. Their bullets sparked harmlessly against his aura of static-charged air. He swung the hammer. A shockwave of caged lightning and raw physical force exploded outward. Bodies were not thrown. They were erased. The Space Marines watched, not with awe, with calculation. He moved through the ash like a storm given form. The hammer grew hotter with every blow, the scripture along its surface lighting up one by one as if awakening. "Impossible," one Marine whispered. "Or destined," another replied. Above the ruined spires of Calth's forgotten glory, lightning gathered that owed nothing to the warp and nothing to the Emperor. Thor lifted the weapon high. The Aquila over his heart burned faintly, not in worship, in warning. And as the first true thunder of this universe answered his call, even the watching demons hesitated. Was this a new weapon of mankind, or the beginning of a new war? The air over Calth's broken surface burned, not with holy fire, nor with the cleansing wrath of the Emperor, but with the cold, oily corruption of the warp leaking through fractured reality. The sky twisted in bruised colors, streaked with lightning that did not belong to any storm, and ash fell like black snow upon a battlefield that had forgotten the meaning of silence. Thor stood amid the ruin he had made. Bodies lay scattered in fragments, their blood sizzling where it touched the superheated ground. The cultists had died screaming, not prayers to their dark gods, but raw animal fear, a terror they had never learned to feel in a universe so numb to horror. The war hammer trembled in his grip. It was not resisting now, it was hungering. From the ruined spires rose a new wave of enemies, not mortal, not fully. The veil between the worlds had thinned, and through the tears in reality crawled the malformed children of the warp. Their forms writhed like thoughts given flesh, horned, many-eyed, surrounded by a mist of madness that clawed at the mind. Bolter fire erupted from the flanks as the Ultramarines advanced in perfect, disciplined formation. Their shots were precise, methodical, killing in rows. Yet even as mass reactive rounds tore into demonic flesh, new horrors crawled from the burning ground. "The Storm Man draws them," one Marine voxed. "Then let him finish them," another replied. Thor felt the truth of it in his bones. The demons were circling him, not blindly, but with a hateful kind of awareness. They could sense what he was, something that did not belong, something that had no place in the great game of chaos. They hated that. He lifted the hammer and brought it down. The impact was not thunder, it was judgment. A wave of white-blue lightning burst outward in a dome, stripping flesh from bones that did not belong to this reality, burning them out of existence rather than killing them. The ground cracked wide, molten veins of energy crawling through the broken stonecrete. The demons screamed, not in pain, in confusion. This was not the warp. This was not sorcery. This was not chaos. This was wrong. A greater shape rose from the heart of the battlefield, towering, twisted, a mockery of a warrior god, its body composed of fused limbs and screaming faces. Where its heart should have been, a rune burned, an offering to blood, to madness, to endless war. A demon prince. It raised a claw like a cathedral of bone and roared a word that bent the air. False. The word struck Thor like a hammer of its own, not physically, but spiritually. A denial of existence, spat from the mouth of something that had seen gods die screaming. Thor stepped forward. Each footfall split the earth. "You are rot," he said, his voice a low roll of gathering storm. "You are theft made flesh." The demon prince laughed, a sound like metal being torn apart. "You are nothing," it replied inside his mind. "No warp, no fate, no soul for the gods to claim." For a heartbeat, doubt flickered, not fear, recognition. In Asgard, he had known where he stood. In Midgard, he had known what he protected. Here, among the ruins of a galaxy choking on faith and blood, he was unmoored, a god without a realm, a warrior without a myth. The hammer's conduits flared brighter. The scripture carved into its surface burned with cold light. It was not blessing him. It was reacting to him. He raised the weapon high. The sky responded, not with warp lightning, but with a storm that tore open the poison clouds by pure defiance. Wind howled through broken spires. Ash was torn from the air. A faint scent of ozone cut through the rot and decay. The Ultramarines paused, watching. This was not doctrine. This was not sanctioned. This was impossible. Thor brought the hammer down upon the demon prince. The world went white. The impact birthed a pillar of lightning that punched through the ground and into the sky. A bridge of raw storm that burned like a wound in reality. The demon screamed as its form began to unravel, not consumed, not banished, but erased, stripped from the rules of existence it understood. In dying, it spoke one last truth. You cannot stay. God that is not. Then it was gone. Silence followed, a terrible, aching silence. The warp cracks began to close, as if reality itself wished to forget what had intruded upon it. The sky darkened to its previous bruised state. The ash resumed its slow, endless fall. Thor lowered the hammer. His armor steamed faintly. The Aquila over, his heart glowed softly, not in approval, in unease. The Space Marines approached, bolters still raised, but their movement slower now. "You fight like a relic from a better age," one of them said, "or a worse one." Thor looked at the ruins stretching to the horizon, at the piles of bodies, at the broken symbols of a faith that had devoured its own children. "This world teaches through suffering," he said, "but it does not heal." The Marine said nothing. Above them, in the upper atmosphere, unseen by mortal eyes, the black ship watched, and far beyond that, the golden throne pulsed faintly, as if responding to a distant thunder. Within the ashes of Kulth, a corpse-cold wind whispered through shattered cathedrals and broken banners. Saint, weapon, heresy. The question remained open, and as new warp storms began to gather at the edge of the system, darker than before, the universe itself seemed to ask, if thunder could burn demons from existence, what would happen when it turned toward the Imperium itself? The war did not end when the last demon was erased. It simply became quieter, heavier, more watchful. Thor remained on Kulth long after the Ultramarines had restored order in their own methodical, merciless way. The cult fires were extinguished. The traitors were executed. The broken cities were marked for slow reconstruction that would take centuries and cost uncounted millions of lives. Yet it was not the victory that spread across the ashes. It was him. It began with the wounded. A guardsman, half buried in rubble, his legs crushed by fallen steel, had been pulled free by serfs who expected him to die before they reached the medici tents. Thor walked past him without intending to stop. He felt the man's eyes on him, fearful, shaking, unbelieving. "Are you real?" the soldier whispered. Thor did not answer. He simply laid a hand on the man's shoulder. The touch was not a blessing. There was no prayer, no chant, no ritual. Yet the man's scream of agony faltered. Bone ground back into place. Torn tissue stitched itself together in a slow, impossible crawl. When Thor lifted his hand, the guardsman stared at his legs as if they belonged to another body. He wept. Word spread. It always does. The next were not soldiers, but children. Thin, burned, their skin eaten raw by chemical rain. They did not ask for miracles. They only stared at him in mute, hollow awe. Where he walked, the air felt cleaner. Where he stood, the howling of the warp in the distant hollows of the world weakened, thinning like fog before a blade of sunlight that this world had never known. The ecclesiarchy did not rejoice. They watched. Their priests gathered in sealed chambers on terror, heads bowed not in prayer, but in calculation. The reports were fed to them in emotionless tones by servo-skulls that did not understand the weight of their words. "Subject emits restorative phenomena," the skull intoned. "Non-psychic. Non-warp. Impossible," a cardinal hissed. "Yet recorded," replied another. Miracles in the Imperium were not gifts. They were verdicts. Thor felt it before he saw it. The shift. The moment when awe hardened into fear. Shrines appeared in broken alleyways of Kulth's hive ruins. Rough carvings of a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a hammer raised to storm-racked skies. The aquila was scratched clumsily over the chest in imitation of what he burned with unwillingly. "Saint of Storm," desperate voices whispered. "Emperor's Thunder," others cried. Thor turned from these devotions every time he saw them, but the faith clung like ash. He did not want it. That did not matter. In the distance, a girl lay dying. Warp sickness. The kind that twisted the mind until it turned inward and devoured itself. She screamed without words as her body convulsed, veins burning black beneath her skin. The medici had abandoned her. The priests had sealed her away. Better she die in isolation than infect morale. Thor went to her. The walls of the chamber were marked with warning sigils and prayers of containment. He stepped through them as though they did not exist. He knelt beside the small, broken form. Her eyes found him, not pleading, resigned. "No more cages," she whispered. He placed his hand on her forehead. The sickness did not flee like an animal. It burned. White-blue light pulsed through her small body, not from the warp, not from sorcery, but from something older and stubborn beyond this universe's rules. The corruption shrieked soundlessly as it was driven out, thread by thread, like rot being pulled from deep wounds. She slept, not as a coma, as rest. Outside the chamber, 3 inquisitors watched through crystal lenses. "This cannot continue," one said. "If he is a saint," another replied, "then he is not ours to command." "If he is not," the third murmured, "then he is the greatest heresy we have ever witnessed." Above Calth, thunder rolled through skies that no longer remembered true storms. Not because Thor called it, because the universe reacted to his presence. Ships of the Adeptus Ministorum changed their approach vectors to avoid him, as if proximity alone might be contagion. Astropaths recorded distortions in their visions when they tried to look upon his future. "He stands outside fate," one wrote, before clawing his own eyes out. In the depths of the warp, something else took notice. Not Khorne, not Tzeentch, not Nurgle, not Slanesh, but smaller, older predators who circled in the darkness between greater horrors. A lightning that did not taste of the warp disturbed the balance of their hunting grounds. It was offensive. Thor finally stood alone atop the highest shattered spire of Calth's old capital hive. Wind tore at his red cloak, now faded and burned. The war hammer rested at his side, quiet, contemplative. He looked down at the world, at the shrines, at the wounded who lived because he had walked past them, at the banners bearing his distorted image next to the Emperor's symbol. A god turned into a prayer, a warrior turned into an icon. The sky darkened, not with storm clouds, with watching. Systems beyond Korth began to experience strange, flickering miracles. A dying child on a world he had never walked upon lived through impossible recovery. A demon failed to manifest where it had been promised. The reports travelled. So did the fear. And in the deepest sealed vaults beneath Terra, a single forbidden title was spoken aloud for the first time in 10,000 years. Living Saint. Thor felt the word settle upon him like iron chains made of light. He did not speak it, but he understood the danger. If this Imperium began to believe in him, it would never let him go. And the final question, whispered not by priests or soldiers, but by the galaxy itself, lingered in the poisoned air. Can a god remain free once he becomes someone's miracle? The summons came not as an order, but as a challenge. A storm of parchment seals, coded vox bursts, and sealed reliquary mark arrived at Calth within a single Terran hour. The message was simple, carved in ritual phrasing and laced with threat. He was to be tested, not by priests, not by politicians, but by angels. The blood angel's vessel descended through Calth's wounded skies like a blade of red and gold. Its hull was a cathedral of war, adorned with sculptures of winged warriors carved in frozen agony, their faces locked between devotion and rage. Thunder rolled across its surface, drawn not from the warp, but from Thor's presence, as if the storm within him recoiled at what approached. They met him upon a plateau of broken marble and fused glass. The blood angels did not surround him with bolters raised. They stood in silence. Their armor shone crimson despite the ash, their helms removed, their faces bare, pale, beautiful, haunted. Their eyes held a thirst so tightly caged it trembled behind every blink. Their leader stepped forward. His name was not given. His rank did not matter. Only the weight of 10,000 years of genetic curse rested in the lines of his face. "You are a contradiction," he said. Thor did not answer. "We drink the blood of our god to remember his death," the angel continued. "We drown ourselves in war to forget our own. And yet, you stand here untouched by the thirst, untouched by the hunger of the warp." One of the angels extended a blade. It was not for attack. It hovered in the air between them. "Prove that your miracles are not lies." The ground split open before Thor, not with machinery, not with explosives, but with memory. The world fell away. In its place rose a vision crafted not by illusion, but by genetic memory and warp echoes, the kind carved into the blood angels' very souls. The sky of terror burned. Cities screamed. The betrayal of Horus unfolded in screams of iron and agony. Thor saw towering figures in ancient armor, tearing into legions of screaming men. He felt the psychic scream of a father betrayed by his most beloved son. He saw the Emperor stand, alive, radiant, terrible. And he saw Horus raise his weapon. The vision shifted. Now it was the blood angel's ancient sorrow, the black rage, the curse. Space Marines screaming as they believed themselves to be sanguineous, reliving the last moments of their fallen Primarch's life over and over again. They did not show him this to impress. They showed him this to break him, to see if he would turn away. Thor walked through the vision. He felt the heat of burning terror. He heard the death cry of angels, and he did not falter. "That was your god," he said quietly, as he looked upon the Emperor's shining, doomed form, a man trying to be more than he was. He turned to the image of Sanguinius falling, wings burning, blood painting the void. "And he was your miracle," Thor said. The blood angel stiffened. "You do not speak his name," they warned. Thor turned back to their leader. "You suffer because you worship bones and ghosts," he said, not cruelly, but with the calm of a storm that had seen worlds live and die. "You drown in memory and call it faith." Silence fell. The vision shattered. Reality returned. They stood again upon broken cold stone, the air thick with ash and static. The leader of the blood angels studied him for a long time. Then he spoke, more quietly than before. "You have seen the truth," he said. "Most turn away." He gestured to the waiting warriors behind him. "Second trial." The angels moved as one. They drew weapons not of iron, but of memory. Their blades were carved with fragments of their own genetic pain. Each weapon carried a shard of their Primarch's final moments. They did not attack him. They circled him. "If you are a saint," the leader said, "you will not be tempted." The air grew cold. The warp pressed inward, not through rifts in space, through rifts in thought. Thor felt it creeping toward him. Not chaos, not gods, but memory, his own. He saw Asgard, intact, bright. He heard laughter. He smelled rain on green leaves. He felt Mjolnir in his hand, familiar, faithful. He saw Midgard spared, protected, loved. "Would you go back?" the silence seemed to ask. "Would you abandon this broken galaxy and return to realms that still remembered hope?" The hammer of the Imperium trembled at his side. It did not want answer. It wanted choice. Thor closed his eyes. He let the visions burn. He let the pain of what was lost move through him instead of around him. And he stayed. The blood angels felt it. The air shifted. The thirst in their veins recoiled, confused by a presence that did not judge them, did not command them, but understood the weight of endless war. The leader nodded once. "You are not pure," he said, "but neither are we. The angel stepped back, weapons lowered. For the first time since his arrival in this universe, warriors of the Imperium did not look at him as a test. They looked at him as a question. The sky above darkened, not with clouds, with approaching visions. The warp twisted at the edges of reality, and in its depths, vast eyes turned toward Calth. Something ancient had felt the trials. Something foul had noticed the storm that could not be claimed. And as the first whispers of a rotting, laughing presence drifted through the void between stars, one final truth settled over the world like falling ash. If Thor had endured the trials of the faithful, he was about to be tested by something far worse. Could even a god of storm stand unbroken? In the Garden of Rot, the transition from Calth to the plague world was not marked by stars or distance. It was marked by smell. Rot travelled faster than light. The stench of it crept into Thor's senses long before the black ship's hull registers declared proximity. Sweet decay, wet corrosion. The breath of something that had been alive far too long and refused to die. Even the ship's machine spirits seemed to whimper, their rhythmic chants faltering as circuits detected atmospheres that defied purity. This world had once been named. That name had been buried under centuries of filth. Now it was simply catalogued as a contagion zone, a place where hope was sent to learn how to rot. The landing was not glorious. There were no banners, no hymns, no parades of faithful, only sickly drizzle that coated armor in clinging slime, and a sky swollen with clouds the color of bruised flesh. Thor stepped from the landing ramp. The ground gave slightly under his boots, like a wound that had never fully closed. Every step released a quiet, moist sound of decay. The air was alive with flies that moved in ritualistic spirals, forming crude halos around rusted spires and broken statues. Bones lay in heaps, but not as remains of battles. They had grown there, woven, cultivated. Behind him, the inquisitorial escort remained inside the ship, unwilling to walk upon this surface. Vox orders came through, distorted, choking. Locate source of corruption. Observe anomaly interaction. Do not engage if transformation occurs. Thor understood. They did not expect him to survive. The first sign of life was not movement. It was laughter. A soft, wet chuckle that seemed to rise from the ground itself. The earth split open. Not violently, gently, like a mouth opening to breathe. From it rose a figure that had once been something like a man. Armor hung from a frame of swollen flesh. Horns curled from a skull that still remembered a human face, stretched now into a mockery of joy. A plague marine. He did not raise his weapon. He opened his arms. Grow weary, the warrior gurgled. You may rest. The words were not a threat. They were an invitation. The air thickened. Every breath tasted of stagnation. Thor felt it then, the presence that towered above this world, unseen but absolute. Not the madness of Tzeentch, not the bloodlust of Khorne, not the whispering hunger of Slaanesh. This was slow, endless, patient, Nurgle. The plague marine stepped closer. Where he stepped, the ground turned soft, blooming with puffing boils of pale fungus. You will break, he said kindly. All things do. Thor looked around him. The ruins were not broken by war. They had been embraced by corruption until they collapsed inward, peaceful, accepted. This was not a battlefield. It was a surrender made physical. He remembered the Blood Angel's vision. He remembered the Emperor's broken light. He realized what this was. Despair given a gardener. I have seen decay, Thor said, and his voice carried no anger, only distance. You are not it. You are indulgence. The Plague Marine's smile widened. "Then fight," he whispered. The world roared. The ground burst open as bloated figures dragged themselves free from fungal cocoons. Swarms of flies blackened the air until the world became a living shadow. Rusted weapons rose, dripping filth that hissed when it touched clean metal. Thor swung the hammer. Lightning exploded outward. The first wave of corruption did not burn. It softened. Nurgle's children did not fear pain. They welcomed it. The lightning rolled through them, and instead of screams, they sighed. Flesh split, but rot poured forth like blessed oil. Something shifted in Thor. He understood. Raw force would not win this war. Nurgle was not about destruction. He was about acceptance. And Thor had never accepted anything in his long life without challenge. He stepped forward instead of striking. The Plague Marine hesitated. No one ever walked toward rot without flinching. "I am not afraid of endings," Thor said, "but I do not bow to them." He placed the hammer against the ground, did not strike, did not call lightning. He stood. The storm did not rage. It breathed. The flies slowed. The fungal growths hesitated. The air itself pulled tight, as though the world leaned in to watch what would happen when rot met refusal. The warp shuddered. Deep within the fetid gardens of decay, a great unclean one stirred, its bloated form rolling in sluggish irritation. This was not how mortals resisted. This was not how saints were supposed to endure. The Plague Marine staggered. His rotten hand brushed Thor's armor. The decay did not spread. The rust did not bloom. The corruption recoiled as though burned by something that had no fire. "You do not wither," the Marine said, confusion breaking his gurgling voice. "I endure," Thor replied. Above them, dark clouds parted, not from storm, from rejection. The ground trembled. The laughter faded. The flies fell silent, dropping from the air like tiny corpses. The world, for one fractured moment, remembered what it was to be empty rather than embraced by rot. And in the shifting filth of the warp, something ancient and bloated became aware of him, not as a threat, as an impossibility. As Thor turned back toward the waiting black ship, the hammer heavy in his hand, yet strangely at peace, a whisper passed through the diseased wind. Not Nurgle's voice, not a demon's. A question. If rot could not claim him, if despair could not break him, what kind of storm refuses to die? In a universe built on ending everything. The black ship did not leave the plague world at once. It lingered in low orbit like a predator, uncertain whether the thing it had marked for death had instead marked it. Inside the hold, Thor felt the null fields react to him more slowly now. Their silent erasure of power no longer felt complete. Something within him had changed on that rotting surface. Not strengthened, not sharpened, hardened. The air tasted different. Even the ship's ever-burning incense felt thin. In the chamber prepared for him, the black stone walls flickered with faint warnings that no tech priest could fully translate. Thunder moved behind his ribs with a patience that had not existed before. That was when the silence broke. Not by sound, by light. A thin line of gold appeared in the air before him, trembling, breaking, reforming. It was not the light of the warp. It did not scream or writhe or claw. It endured. The chamber walls faded, not as illusion, but as if they no longer mattered. He stood somewhere else, not in another place, in another will. The landscape was a dream of terror as it had once been. Blue skies stretched above unruined horizon. Oceans rolled untouched by war. Cities rose not as tombs, but as triumphs, and walking through it, tall, radiant, unbroken. The Emperor. He was not a corpse here. He was not a machine-bound god. He was a man wrapped in impossible fire, his presence bending the air without effort. Golden armor shone, untouched by age or loss. Thor did not raise his weapon. He did not kneel. He watched. "You stand in what I wanted, not what I made," the Emperor said. And his voice was not thunder, but gravity itself. "This world never was," Thor replied. "No," the Emperor said, "but it could have been." They walked together through a city that had never fallen. Humans moved freely, their minds bright, their bodies unscarred by fear or mutation. No chains, no censors, no screaming psychers burning to keep darkness away. "You dream of peace," Thor said. "I dreamed of control," the Emperor corrected. "Peace was merely the reward I dangled before myself." The sky darkened, the vision shifted. Now the city burned, now the oceans boiled, now the stars themselves seemed to recoil. In the distance, a throne of broken gold formed from lightning and bone. On it sat another version of the Emperor, a future that had never come to pass, and standing beside him was Thor, not as he was now, not chained, not watched, clad in armor of storm and light, bearing a hammer that was no longer imperial, no longer Asgardian, but something born between worlds. "You would have stood there?" Thor asked. The Emperor did not answer at once. He studied the vision, then closed his eyes. "In one strand of time," he said, "you did." The world twisted again. Now that future burned too. That version of Thor stood amid the ruins of terror, lightning breaking across the golden throne itself, not destroying it, rewriting it. A future where the Emperor rose, a future where the Imperium breathed, and a future where the warp screamed at something it could not name. Thor felt the weight of it, not temptation, responsibility. "You show me a dream," he said. "A warning," replied the Emperor, "and a question." The dream began to fracture. The sky split into fractures of broken time, each shard showing a different path. One where Thor became a symbol of unity. One where he became a weapon of terror more feared than the Inquisition itself. One where chaos learned to adapt to lightning that was not warp. One where the Imperium, unable to control him, burned him in the name of salvation. "You cannot control me," Thor said. The Emperor's gaze was heavy. "I have never controlled the storm," he said. "I have only learned when to stand beneath it and when to step aside." The light dimmed. The world collapsed inward. Before the vision ended, the Emperor stepped closer. "For the first time in 10,000 years, he said softly, "something walks my realm that does not belong to despair." Thor felt the dream slipping away. The throne of gold shattered. The perfect terror crumbled. The Emperor's final words echoed as silence returned. "I do not know if you are my answer, or my replacement." The chamber returned. Black stone walls, silent chains, a ship that feared him. Thor placed a hand against the cold metal. The vibration of the engines felt distant. He was not the same. He did not feel pride. He did not feel fear. He felt the weight of something that had never touched Asgard. Possibility. Far away, on Terra, the golden throne pulsed faintly. In the darkness of its chamber, warning runes flickered without cause. The Astronomicon burned slightly brighter for one single impossible moment. And deep in the warp, something guarded its eyes with claws of boiled shadow. A dream had been seen. A storm had been imagined wearing a crown. And the galaxy, trembling in its endless war, seemed to whisper a question only the dead usually dared to ask. What happens to an empire built on suffering? When someone appears who was never meant to kneel? The black ship did not return Thor to Terra. It released him, not as mercy, as calculation. Hive-world Gathis 9 received him not with ceremony, but with screams. Its spires clawed at a sun that could no longer be seen through the choking yellow clouds of industrial poison. Endless manufactorum stacks belched smoke that tasted of metal, flesh, and despair. The ground level had never known light. It existed in a permanent twilight of leaking pipe systems and flickering lumen strips that hummed like dying insects. Here the Imperium had no golden statues, only rusted idols, only broken promises. Here humanity collapsed inward, stacked in endless layers of suffering. Mutants crawled through pipe corridors too small for normal men, their bones bent by radiation, their skin blistered by chemical drift. Abhumans were chained to conveyor belts, their malformed hands doomed to eternal labor until they collapsed and were dragged away as refuse. This was not a world the Imperium imagined itself ruling. This was a world it had abandoned while still claiming ownership of the bones. Thor felt it the moment his boots touched the metal walkways. The despair was not sharp. It was dull, endless, institutional. Clerics walked past starving children without looking down. Enforcers beat a limping man for the crime of bleeding on a sanctioned floor. The Aquila burned faintly over his heart, not as blessing, as accusation. They saw him before he saw them. A child with too many fingers stared from a drainage pipe. Her eyes were not begging. They were tired. "You're the Thunder Man," she said. He did not deny it. Pale figures emerged from shadow, barely human, skin stretched too tight over malformed bones, tails, gills, extra eyes. Forgotten children of an empire that preached purity while breeding mutation through neglect. They did not kneel. They did not beg. They simply looked at him. "You gonna hurt us?" a boy asked, his voice flat. "No," Thor said. They did not believe him. Faith had never protected them. The first attack came from below, a purge patrol. Enforcers clad in black armor descended through flickering lift shafts, their shock mauls crackling with sanctioned violence. Their vox emitters blared litanies of cleansing. "By decree of the ecclesiarchy, this sector is impure. Subject all deviants to immediate correction." The mutants did not run. They could not. There was nowhere to go. Thor stepped forward before the first blow fell. The hammer rested loosely in his hand. He did not raise it. "You will not kill them," he said. The enforcers laughed. One brought his maul down. The air between them shattered, not in lightning, in pressure. The blow never landed. The maul twisted in the air, bent by forces that were not warp, not psychic, but impossibly real. The enforcer staggered backward as if struck by an unseen wall. "Heretic," the captain spat. "Cowards," Thor corrected. They attacked. He did not kill them. That was what terrified them. He took their weapons. He shattered armor. He turned their blows aside with casual movements that broke bone and steel without breaking flesh. They fled not because he slaughtered them, because he humiliated them. Word spread. It always does. The masses did not pray. They whispered. "A saint who does not burn us. A God that does not demand blood." The priests arrived. They always do. Red-robed figures of the ecclesiarchy descended in gilded processional rigs, their faces hidden behind masks of polished iron. Cherub servitors fluttered above them, silently bleeding from ritual incisions. They did not thank him. They accused. "You defy the decree passive," the high priest rasped. "You defy purity." "I defy cruelty," Thor replied. The word tasted strange here. Cruelty was the law. The priest lifted a staff adorned with the remains of sanctioned martyrs. "These creatures are unworthy of salvation," he said. Their blood is a stain upon the Emperor's dream. Thor looked at the crowd, at broken faces, at twisted limbs, at eyes that had never known mercy. They are his children, Thor said. You have forgotten. Silence fell like a blade. The priest trembled, not in fear, in hatred. You are not a saint, he hissed. You are a temptation. The ecclesiarchy is not slow. Orders were given, not allowed, not recorded, but felt. In the upper levels of the hive, artillery servitors rotated their barrels. Targeting arrays aligned. This was not a debate. This was an execution. Thor felt the world shift. The ship in orbit locked weapons. The air thickened. Mutants clung to him without thinking, hands twisting into his armor like roots seeking soil. They're gonna kill us, the girl whispered. Thor looked up at the ceiling that vanished into darkness miles above. He understood then. This was the true test. Not demons, not gods, not rot. Loyalty. Could he serve an empire that devoured its weakest? Could he be their saint? Or would he become their enemy? The first artillery round screamed through the hive structure, detonating far above, but close enough to rattle the bones of the world. Dust rained like ash. The hammer warmed in his grip. The aquila burned against his chest. And as the next salvo began to arm, a question echoed through the metal bones of Garthis 9. Would the thunder kneel, or break the sky to defend the unworthy? The guns did not fire. The Emperor's tarot turned differently that hour. The artillery arrays atop Garthis 9's hive spires locked, shuddered, and froze, not by order, but by hesitation coded into ancient machine logic that had no name for what stood below them. In the cold void above Terra, far removed from the screams and rot of hive worlds, decisions were made that reshaped destinies with quiet words and sealed lips. The Celestial Council convened. It did not assemble in a room. It manifested within a sanctum of shifting light and layered thought banners, a place where reality was pinned into obedience by logic engines and psychic shields. Here, the High Lords of Terror gathered through hologlyphic projection and mind-linked sigils, their true bodies protected by walls thicker than worlds. They did not speak loudly. They did not speak kindly. He disturbs the pattern, one voice carried, distorted by prayer code and age. The storm grows beyond our control. He has not attacked us, another said. He has defied us. Silence fell. Defiance was worse. The inquisitorial report chimed into existence, its servo-skull voice colorless. Subject has displayed repeated acts of non-sanctioned mercy, has interfered with ecclesiarchal purges, has demonstrated power inconsistent with warp phenomena. A parchment seal rustled in the air, its edges burning with simulated flame. He is a living saint, one of the High Lords said at last. The word fell like a blade. You speak heresy, another answered. No, came the reply. I speak inevitability. The light shifted. Images flickered into being. Kalth's ashes. A plague world walking backward from corruption. Mutant children looking up at a figure carrying thunder in his hands. He draws belief, a third voice said, and belief is power. And power must be owned, another answered. In the depths of the sanctum, something awakened, a sealed order, a protocol with a name that had not been spoken in millennia, extinction by faith. If he falls, one voice said carefully, we will say chaos took him. And if he does not, another asked, then we will decide what kind of lie he is allowed to be. The conversation ended not with agreement, but with readiness. Below the sanctum, in vaults that had not been opened since the days of the Great Crusade, relics were awakened, weapons anointed in the blood of saints, armors engraved with warding prayers that stole light from the air. A contingency learned to breathe again. On Garthis 9, Thor felt it, not as danger, as judgment in motion. The air grew heavier. The faint hum of distant artillery arrays altered pitch. The hammer in his hand vibrated softly, like a living thing that had sensed an approaching storm far greater than any cloud. The mutants around him slept fitfully, believing, for the first time in their twisted lives, that they might wake to see another dawn. Above, far beyond their sight, a fleet altered course. Not a black ship, something older, something cloaked in the kind of silence that outlived empires. Within its heart, a warrior clad in armor as pale as bone knelt before a shrine of broken loyalties. He was not a space marine. He was an answer made flesh. His eyes opened, and he smiled. Back on Terra, the Council's final decree was not spoken aloud. It was whispered into sealed data coffins and entombed within prayer code, carried only by the most faithful of machines. Observe, test, eradicate if necessary. The Golden Throne pulsed faintly. Not approval, not warning. Indifference, perhaps, or something more terrible. Thor stood alone on a rusted platform, overlooking the endless city of pain. The fog of pollution curled around his boots. Far below, stolen hymns of forbidden hope spread through pipes and tunnels, carried by voices that had never before reached for anything. He had given them that. Whether it was gift or curse, he no longer knew. The hammer felt heavier. The Aquila felt colder. The stars above Gathi's 9 shifted slightly, though no one there could see them. War was being prepared not for him, but around him. And as the first silent vessels of a secret fleet slipped into the shadowed void, a single question waited within the heart of the Imperium itself. If a saint cannot be owned, must he be destroyed? The cardinal world did not look like a battlefield. It looked like devotion made into stone. From orbit, its surface shimmered with oceans of cathedral roofs and pilgrimage roads carved into planetary crust. Golden spires pierced cloud cover in endless ranks, each one a needle sowing prayers into the sky. This was a place where faith had not rotted. It had crystallized. Thor was brought openly, not in chains, not as a prisoner, as a symbol. The faithful lined the processional avenues by the millions. They pressed their foreheads to the ground so hard that blood ran in silent patterns across marble tiles. Their voices rose in a thunder that rivaled storms, hymns to the Emperor, fractured now with new syllables. Storm, hammer, saint. Thor walked without a guard. He could feel them behind the walls, beneath the roads, above the heavens. Snipers, assassins, relic weapons tasting the air. His presence made the air bitter. The ecclesiarchy walked beside him in red and gold, their robes too heavy with honours earned through burning and silence. The lead cardinal's face was hidden beneath a mask of polished bone shaped like a screaming saint. "You have inspired dangerous faith," the cardinal said quietly. "I did not ask for it," Thor replied. "That has never mattered," the cardinal said. They reached the Grand Basilica. It was not a building. It was a continent raised in the semblance of a church. Its doors were carved from the rib bones of ancient void beasts. Its stained glass windows were crafted from crystalline meteor fragments etched with scenes of holy massacres. The air inside was thick enough to swim through, heavy with centuries of incense, blood, and curated legend. Thor felt the shift the moment he crossed the threshold. The air closed, the doors sealed, the hymns outside cut off as if a blade had severed their voice. He was alone with them. The cardinals gathered in a circle around him. Their censer smoke turned black as it curled through the air. "You defy our doctrine," the lead cardinal said. "You defy mercy," Thor answered. The cardinal lifted his staff, its head crowned with the skull of a burned saint. "You have made the people look to you," he said, "not to him." Thor felt it then, not from them, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, power systems awakening in hidden places, weapon systems sanctified by prayer and cruelty. The basilica began to hum, not with faith, with targeting arrays. "You were never meant to walk free," the cardinal said. "You were meant to die as proof." The air split. Bolter rounds screamed from hidden alcoves, their shells engraved with exorcism prayers. Plasma fire burst from braziers, once used for sacred flame. The first impact struck Thor's shoulder, detonating against a skin of compressed thunder that shattered the molten heat before it could bite. The crowd outside had no idea. Inside, the basilica became a slaughterhouse, not of people, of truth. Thor moved, not in rage, in refusal. He swung the hammer once. The ceiling cracked. Sacred glass shattered. Light from an angry sky poured through, turning smoke into writhing pillars. Cardinals drew ritual blades, their edges dipped in martyr blood. They charged not as men, but as instruments. Their hatred was not personal. It was devotional. "You are a lie," one screamed as he died. "Then so is your faith," Thor said. He did not kill them all. He broke them. He shattered weapons. He crushed sanctified circuitry. The basilica began to collapse inward as its hidden war machine systems detonated under their own strain. Outside, the doors burst open. The faithful saw fire within their holiest place. They did not understand. They did not need to. They only needed direction. The cardinal, burning, broken, crawling across shattered altar stone, lifted his face toward the crowd. "Behold the heretic," he rasped. "Behold the false saint who strikes holy ground." Silence. Then a sound worse than gunfire. Disbelief, fear, faith turning. Thor stepped out into the light. The crowd pressed in. "They lied to you," he said. His voice rolled like thunder through stone and bone. "They would see you burn before they let you live free." A rock struck his helm. It shattered against the storm around him, bursting into dust. Then another. Then hundreds. "Blasphemy," someone screamed. The chain reaction of belief began. Not against the Imperium. Against him. The guns rose. Pilgrims seized weapons meant for parade and turned them into instruments of survival. Behind them, on distant terraces, true artillery rotated. Someone had already given the order. Thor felt the sky change, not storm. Aim. He lowered the hammer. He did not raise a shield. For a heartbeat, he understood. This was the cost, not of defiance, of being seen. The first artillery shell fired. It detonated behind him, hurling debris and fragments of devotion into the air. The crowd screamed, not in faith, in terror. He could have fought them. He could have broken them. Instead, he stepped backward into shadow. The sky split as a concealed extraction vessel screamed through the clouds. Magnetic tethers locked around him, yanking him from the ground as the basilica collapsed fully into a firestorm of betrayal. Below, the faithful fought themselves. Truth and lie intertwined in blood. From orbit, terror's hidden ships watched. Their verdict adjusted. Subject survives betrayal. Subject endures faith turned hostile. Subject remains unpredictable. In the darkness of the withdrawal hold, Thor felt the weight settle deeper. Not a god, not a saint. A storm that had walked among the faithful and been struck by their fear. And as the ship vanished into the lightless void, one final question burned in the silence where his anger should have lived. How can salvation survive? In a universe where even faith becomes a weapon, the cathedral world did not burn from within. It burned from above. The sky split open not with thunder, but with shrieking violations of reality as warp storms clawed their way into real space. Where once the air had been thick with incense and scripture, now it tasted of brass, bile, and ancient hate. The heavens twisted into spirals of bruised purple and corpse gold, and across that blasphemous firmament, shapes moved that had never been meant for mortal skies. Thor was not brought to this world. He came, not by invitation, not by command, by instinct. The broken streets of the Basilica city stretched endlessly around him, their marble cracked, their saints shattered, their holy water basins filled with ash and blood. The faithful who had once filled these avenues lay dead or worse, their forms twisted into offerings, nailed into the walls in mockery of their own devotion. He could feel the warp here, not as a storm, as a wound. The hammer felt heavier. The aquila over his chest felt colder. From the torn mouth of the cathedral ruins, they came. A tide of chaos, not cultists, not false men. These were champions, warriors of the ruinous powers, clad in Baroque armor fused to flesh, their weapons dripping with demonic ichor. Their laughter rolled through the shattered streets like grinding tombstones. "Behold the storm," one of them rasped, its voice echoing from too many throats. "Come to kneel." Behind them, reality split wider. A rift blossomed open like a flowering wound, and through it crawled towering things that dragged cathedrals behind them in chains of bone and fire. Demons poured forth in shrieking waves, their forms flickering between nightmare and myth. Thor stepped forward alone. No space marines, no guardsmen, no priests, only him, and the ruin of faith made into a battlefield. The first blow of the siege was not aimed at him. It was aimed at the ground. A demon engine struck the street, splitting it open and vomiting warp flame down into the bones of the world. The basilica trembled, half of its upper spires collapsing in slow, screaming arcs. Thor struck back. He raised the hammer and called not to the sky, but to himself. Lightning answered. A wall of white-blue fury surged outward, tearing through the first ranks of demons. They were not torn apart. They were undone, not banished, not returned, but erased from force and purpose so completely that even the warp recoiled from the absence they left. The champions surged forward. Axes met hammer, warp fire met storm. Every strike sent shockwaves through stained glass and fractured saints. The air screamed as impossible forces collided. Each blow felt like smashing reality against itself. Above, the warp storms tightened. They were learning, adapting. A towering shape emerged from the rift, a greater demon. Its body was a cathedral of screaming faces and armored limbs, its wings stretching wide enough to blot out the twisted stars. A crown of broken halos burned above its horned skull. "Your storm is small," it said, and the words fell like collapsing tombs. Thor felt the truth of it. In this universe, gods died. In this universe, storms were consumed. In this universe, hope was a lie told to children before they were fed to the machine. He planted the hammer into the fractured stone. The ground split, not away from him, toward him. The ruined basilica responded. Columns cracked and turned inward. Broken saints leaned closer. The very stones seemed to remember what they had once been built for: sanctuary, refusal, defiance. "You mistake me," Thor said, and his voice was no longer only thunder. It was iron. "I am not here to win." The greater daemon laughed. Then the laughter faltered. The storm did not explode. It did not expand outward. It collapsed inward, into Thor. The lightning wrapped around his body like a second skin, not wild, not furious, but stable, controlled, purposeful. The hammer's runes burned so bright they peeled away their own scripture, revealing bare, raw metal beneath. A weapon, stripped of lies. He rose into the air, not by flight, by rejection of gravity. The greater daemon struck. A claw like a falling cathedral crashed into him. The impact shattered the air. The ground fell away. They met mid-collapse, storm against abyss. The hammer struck the demon's skull. The world went silent, not for a second, not for a heartbeat, for longer. A silence that even the warp did not understand. When sound returned, it arrived as shock. A shockwave poured outward from the point of contact, tearing through demons, rifts, storms, and shattered faith alike. The warp storm in the sky recoiled as if burned. The rift screamed as it was dragged closed by raw defiance. The greater demon cracked, not physically, conceptually. It lost meaning. It became a thing that had no memory of what it was meant to be. And then it was nothing. Thor fell. He struck the ground hard enough to fracture the basilica's heart. But he stood, alone now. The demons withdrew, not in fear, in confusion. The warp pulled itself tighter, unwilling to touch something that no longer played by its rules. Far above, hidden Imperial ships watched in stunned silence. Auspex arrays malfunctioned. Predictive engines returned nothing. Probability engines failed entirely. "He stands," a voice whispered over a secure channel. Alone. In the ruins of the shattered basilica, Thor lowered the hammer. The storm did not leave him. It remained, quiet, waited. The clouds above began to close. The last of the warp lightning vanished, and in that returning silence, something changed. Not outside, within. The question was no longer whether he could survive. It was no longer whether he was saint or weapon. It was something far more dangerous. As ash fell in slow morning arcs, and the last echoes of battle faded into broken stone, the universe bent, just slightly, toward him. And the final, terrible question formed not from fear, but from possibility. If one storm could stand alone against hell itself, what would happen if it chose to rise higher? The storm did not end after the battle. It turned inward. Among the collapsed bones of the Basilica world, Thor stood alone while distant echoes of warp thunder withdrew like wounded beasts. The sky, once split by madness, began to knit itself back together, though the scars would remain etched into the void for centuries. His armor was cracked. The aquila over his heart was burned nearly white. The hammer no longer hummed with borrowed machine spirits. It felt awake, not as a tool, as a witness. He could feel them beyond the horizon. Imperial ships, silent, watching, measuring. He could feel the warp farther still, recoiling in suspicion. Something older than demons shifted in its endless dark, recognizing a new pattern forming where none had been allowed. Thor did not feel triumph. He felt clarity. The air grew warmer, not with heat, with presence. A low, impossible hum rose from the broken earth. The stones at his feet began to vibrate, not from damage, but from alignment. Cracks filled with soft golden light that did not burn and did not blind. It felt familiar, not like Asgard, not like Midgard, but like standing in a place that had been waiting for a long time. The light rose around him slowly, carefully, not as chains, as invitation. He resisted at first. Instinct. The Imperium's light was a consuming thing. It burned psychers alive. It chained saints. It buried truth beneath ritual and fear. But this light was not coming from terror. It was not coming from the Golden Throne. It came from somewhere lower, from the hunger of humanity itself. Desperate, broken, still alive. Images poured into him. Not visions, not dreams but lives. A woman huddled beside a broken heater, whispering prayers not to the Emperor, but to the idea of mercy. A child on some forgotten death world staring at storm-torn skies and wishing something would answer. A guardsman choking on blood, not asking to live, only asking not to die alone. This was not worship, this was need. Thor dropped to one knee, not in submission, in understanding. The light gathered closer, thickening, shaping, responding. It did not remake him. It recognized him. The warp reacted. Far beyond this world, the Imperium twisted violently. Demonic entities that had once hunted, whispered, and schemed recoiled as if scorched by a presence that neither followed chaos nor obeyed the old stasis of the Imperium. This was wrong. This was new. Thor felt his essence shift, not his power, not his soul, but his place, like a storm that had stopped obeying the horizon. The hammer lifted from the ground by itself, slowly, reverently. Lightning traced across its surface, not wild and shattering but precise, contained, written like scripture formed of thunder. The air smelled of ozone and incense, not the choking rot of Terra's cathedrals. Something cleaner, something older. The aquila over his chest burned away, not destroyed, transformed. Its twin heads softened, streamlining into abstract wings of light that no longer represented the Imperium's cruelty, only its surviving hope. He stood. The light did not engulf him. It crowned him, not like a king, like a beacon. Somewhere deep beneath Terra's crust, the golden throne pulsed, not brighter, not weaker, uncertain. The Astronomicon flickered ever so slightly, its beam through the warp bending for a heartbeat toward this distant, forgotten world. Records began to fail. Dead saints flickered in their tombs. Reliquaries cracked. Written prayers changed subtly on their own parchment. A phrase began to spread through the dreams of the faithful. The storm that walks, the light that does not burn. Thor looked into the sky. The clouds parted fully now, revealing stars long hidden by filth and war. They felt closer, reachable. He understood then. He was no longer a god lost in a hostile universe. He was no longer merely a warrior. He was no longer a weapon. He was something the Imperium had once believed was possible before it buried itself under fear. A living saint, but not of order, not of empire, of endurance. The distant Imperial fleet moved, not to attack, not to worship, to follow, to observe, to learn how close they dared come to something they could not control. Thor raised the hammer. The storm did not rage, it breathed. The light wrapped around him fully now, sealing into place, not as armor, but as presence. Reality bent slightly to accommodate him. Stones lifted, dust formed spirals. The air itself knelt, and far away, on Terra, within the throne room, warning sigils flared along the walls for the first time in 10,000 years, without any mechanical cause. Not danger, recognition. As thunder walked the broken ground of the Basilica world, now reborn as silent testament, the final barrier inside him gave way. Not toward pride, not toward despair, toward purpose. And as the storm beneath his skin stabilized into something that could not easily be undone, a single question echoed through the warp, through Terra, and through every battered corner of the Imperium of Man. If a saint can be born without chains, what will the galaxy do when it realizes he cannot be bound? The galaxy did not wake all at once. It shuddered. World by world, system by system, small impossibilities began to surface like cracks in a tomb that had been sealed for too long. Astropaths screamed of lightning in the warp that did not burn. Navigators reported paths through the immaterium that briefly cleared, as though storms had learned to part for something they could not reach. No one said his name aloud. Names gave shape, shape gave power. So they called him. Other things, the storm saint, the unchained light, the thunder that refuses. Thor walked no thrones. He claimed no armies. He left no monuments. He moved from broken world to broken world, not as a conqueror, not as a herald, but as a presence. Where he passed, battlefields fell silent for a single breath. Demons recoiled, not in fear, but confusion. Warp storms twisted, uncertain how to behave around something that belonged to neither order nor decay. He saved nothing alone. He changed how things broke. On a forge world choking on rebellion, he stood between Titan war engines and the masses that had been condemned to the grinding gears. He did not destroy the god machines. He struck their cores just enough to make them stop, to make their machine spirits dream of peace instead of slaughter. On a shrine moon infested with 1,000 hungry cults, he walked through their summoning circles without raising his hammer. The sigils melted. The sacrifices slept. The demons never came. The Imperium began to adjust. Not openly, not quickly. Ships changed their routes to quietly follow in his wake. Inquisitors rewrote reports. Ecclesiarchy sermons softened their edges just slightly when speaking of impossible mercy. Not because they believed, because they were afraid not to. On Terra, the Celestial Council held fewer meetings. There were fewer debates. No decision would be reached about him, not because there was no will to act, but because none could predict what would happen if they did. A living storm could not be executed safely. Not anymore. Not after too many had seen. Not after too many had survived because of him. One night, beneath a sky strangled by smog and dying stars, Thor walked alone upon the surface of an unnamed world. Its cities had been leveled long ago, its people scattered or devoured. Only the stone remained cracked and wounded. The wind moved through broken streets. No prayers followed him here, no fear, no devotion. Only silence. He stopped. He looked upward. There was no Asgard beyond that sky. No Midgard. Only endless war and cold fire and a galaxy drowning in the consequences of its own survival. The hammer rested at his side. It no longer felt foreign. It no longer felt borrowed. It felt like a promise he had not yet decided whether to keep. Somewhere, far beyond the limits of mortal stellar maps, the golden throne flickered, not in pain, in thought. A mind older than empires felt the ripple of him. The emperor could not rise, could not speak, could not walk. But he could sense when the storm passed through the fabric of his broken dream. Thor felt it too, a gaze, not judging, not commanding, watching. "You cannot use me," he said into the empty air, though no voice answered. The wind answered. The sky did not split. The thunder did not roar. And yet the moment carried weight. He was not a weapon now. He was not an interloper. He was not a mistake. He was what came after despair stopped being enough. In time, legends were written, not in official archives, not on sanctioned parchment, but in whispers. Guardsmen would speak of a battle that should have ended them, saved by a man surrounded by silent lightning. Children would draw pictures of storms with wings. Mutants would tell their children that once, someone tall and awful and kind had told them they mattered. Chaos learned, adapted, began to fear silence more than screams. Even the gods of the warp began to leave certain storms alone. They did not understand him. That was worse. Thor did not age. He did not break. He did not become something less, or something more than he was. He simply endured. World by world, war by war, not to rule, not to redeem, but to remind existence that it had once contained something other than chains. And somewhere in the vast, vomiting darkness of a galaxy that had forgotten how to hope, a final truth began to settle like snowfall upon graves. He would never be owned. He would never be crowned. He would never kneel. The thunder that walks forever did not belong to the Imperium. He did not belong to chaos. He did not belong to the dead gods of broken worlds. He belonged to the storms that refused to die. And as the stars flickered behind poisoned clouds and a million wars burned without end, the last whispered question of his legend drifted through the void, unanswered and undefeated. If a storm can walk forever, who, in all of creation, can ever truly claim the sky?